Okay, everyone. I have HM. Well, she writes under HM Reinhard. That's what you'll see on the cover of her books. But this is
Yeah.
Hannah, who's with me today, and I'm super excited to have her. How are you, Hannah?
I'm doing so good. It's so nice to be here. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. I was just everyone like you didn't see what we were talking about, or I'll hear what we were talking about before I actually started recording. But I was telling her that her hair is like I love her hair. So I hope that if you ever come back on here, it is a different color again.
Oh, for
And
sure. For
okay,
sure.
I love that. Like you're appealing to everything that I like as a gay man and a gay man who works in aesthetics specifically. So anyway, Hannah is an author. Obviously, these are author interviews, and she is an indie author. So you're in good company here. Hannah, I know that you are a fantasy author, but it looks like you describe yourself as a dark fantasy author.
I
So
do.
I
I
like that.
do.
It's intriguing. And as you know, I was telling you earlier, I'm not really like a fantasy person. Like I don't write fantasy. Like I've read fantasy books, but they tend to be the ones that are like, everyone knows like I've read the Song of Ice and Fire books and all of that. But
Yeah.
and I've read
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings. But you know, this is one of the things where I'm gonna have to ask you, can you tell me what exactly dark fantasy is? Because I mean I have something in my head when I hear that, but I don't know if it's accurate. So
Well,
how would you kind of describe dark fantasy?
I feel like in general, when it comes to books, like we all have our own kind of variations of genres, like what we think falls into certain categories. Uh, I would say for me, for specifically for my book, for my writing, dark fantasy means it's fantasy, but it's very gritty. It has a lot of darker elements. I'm not afraid to write about death and lots of gore. That's just part of the story to me because uh I mean, I love a happy, rosy book as much as the next person, but like if we didn't have actual consequences to things, I'm not as invested in the story. So for me, having kind of a darker tones to my plots, to my
Mhm.
fantasy is a keystone of dark fantasy.
Well, that's cool to me because I actually I love horror. Like that's my thing. I don't talk about it a lot actually, like on in my videos or anything. I'm always like sci-fi, but like I actually love horror. So I do like the darker side of things. So to me, that kind of fantasy is appealing because I tend to think fantasy and it's almost like kind of whimsical in a way.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I like the idea of it being grittier. So that's
Mhm.
pretty cool. So your book is called The Black Hand.
Yes.
And I know that you released it, I think it was December of last year, right? Oh, that's such a pretty cover. I like
I
that.
know.
That's
Yeah.
okay. You know what? I'm just gonna before I even start asking you about the book, I'm gonna ask you that because this is something that comes up with like indie authors online where they're wondering like where to get a cover.
Yes.
So like I actually, the more that I have talked about this with people, and the more I've met people, the more I'm looking at my own books and I'm like, yeah, I could have done better. So yours is gorgeous. So
Thank you.
where how did you like go about getting that? Like
Well,
give people some advice.
I'll tell you right now, it started off very embarrassingly. Because originally when I had designed the cover, I used this I never intended on originally publishing it. It had been just for me. I used art that I found on Pinterest as
Okay.
my cover because I was like, this is so pretty. And I printed my first copy that way. I hadn't
Mhm.
intended on publishing it at the time, so I just printed my own version and I loved it. It was so lovely. And then I had someone point out, like, oh, that's a video game character, and 100% this is AI artwork. And I was like, the shame, the
You're like
shame.
the same. Oh no.
And so, it
So
wasn't
that
until
prompted
later.
you to do something
Yes,
about
yes,
it.
it wasn't until later when I was looking at publishing it, and then I was like, okay, I know what I want visually. I wanted, well, I'll just hold it up. I wanted something very dark, but I wanted the different features to look like they were carved from stone or carved from bone, maybe, and something that was very intricate and beautiful, but had a lot of like negative space in it.
Mhm.
I'm a graphic designer on the side, so yeah, thanks.
Hey.
Anyways,
Yeah.
so yeah. So actually what I did, I actually don't know many other authors who have done this. I think most authors tend to find their cover designers through like Readsy or they know someone like through TikTok.
Mhm.
I am a Reddit person and I'm on Reddit quite a bit. And there's a subreddit called Hungry Artists, and it's where artists who are having trouble kind of finding work are willing to just do stuff. So you can post on there and be like, "Oh, I'm looking for this. Here's my budget. Here's my time frame." And I play a lot of D&D, so before I had an art piece commissioned for our D&D group, and so I'd used Reddit's Hungry Artists thing before, and so I went in basically being like, this is the vibe I'm looking for. This is my budget. Send me a portfolio. So then I had all of these artists basically reach out and say, I would love to do that. And here's my portfolio. And then I weeded it down until I found my artist, Nevena Yevtich. She is amazing. She is phenomenal. And if I can, I will get her to do the covers for the whole series. This is just the first in a trilogy. So it worked out very well. My only thing I would say to anybody who's thinking about this, it's a great way to find new artists that don't have a big portfolio, that are looking to expand in every possible art style you could find. The only thing is sometimes you have to be aware of scammers. So just check, make sure artists have been used before, like trusted portfolios and stuff like that. But it was a phenomenal experience. She walked me through every step. I signed a contract. We had I gave her like half a deposit up front.
Mhm.
She walked me through. We talked about font choices. She was just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I had a very good experience with it, but she's amazing. I
That's
love her.
great. No, like it looks so good. Like that is super legit. Like I'm like I'm not kidding you when I'm like staring at my screen right now thinking
It's
like that's beautiful. So,
I
and
got
I
very
feel
lucky.
like looking at that, even just the cover fits the tone of like what you were talking about. Like with like dark fantasy, like I can
Yeah.
look at that and then say like this is what I think the story is going to be like. And it definitely fits. So like I
It looks
feel
really
like,
good on a bookshelf too. So,
oh yeah. Is that a hardcover one? It
this
has a
is a
jacket and
hardcover. It has a
everything.
dust jacket.
Oh my God. Like, and here's the thing, I I had made my own covers like when I started out because like I had like a little bit of graphic design experience and I wasn't like looking for anything crazy. So I thought the cover was good at the beginning. And then like a little while
Yeah.
into it, I kind of like look back and I'm just like, what was I thinking? I redid it again. And this time I did it, I really did it myself and like did a kind of like a spacescape scene from scratch. And it came out fine. But I just feel like when you're designing, like say you're doing it yourself, it's not easy to do hardcover ones because like
No,
the yeah, like the dimensions are
it's
crazy
not.
and like you
Oh,
yeah, it's really tough. So like having someone who is like a professional artist doing that, it's just going to come out so much better. Like maybe like someone
yeah.
can do it themselves for an ebook because you're only dealing with the front cover. But I just feel like when you start getting into print and you're dealing especially with hardcover ones, like
Yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
it's so much more helpful to have someone
Yeah.
who like does that professionally. So yeah, that's awesome. And I'm so happy for you that you
Oh,
found
thank you.
an artist who was like both easy to work with and like legit and you didn't get scammed out
Yeah.
of your money. So
Yeah.
um yeah,
That was
you
a
know,
worry for a little bit,
yeah,
but
and I never would have thought to look on Reddit for that. So that's
yeah,
actually that's like a really good, like I was thinking maybe like Fiverr or like freelancer or something.
I did look at Fiverr. Was
Yeah.
not impressed,
So
but
yeah, I actually, this is kind of off topic. I was just me and my fiance are putting our like save the date stuff together for our wedding next year. And I was trying to find like an artist to do it. So I went on Fiverr and because I didn't want us to have to like get like a photo shoot and all this stuff because we want to recreate, that like that photo from like World War II of the sailor kissing the nurse
yes,
in like Times
in
Square.
Times
Yeah.
Square. Yeah,
Yeah. So we wanted to do that because we have a whole Navy theme because he's in the military. And and it's gonna be like Pacific World War II. But I was trying to find an artist for it because I was like, I don't want to have to get like costume. I want to have to get a photographer and try to like do all this stuff. It would be easier if someone could just digitally paint it. So I go on
yeah,
Fiverr and like I wasn't impressed. Like just like you were saying. Like I found one artist who I
yeah.
really liked and I reached out to them.
Good,
But
good.
overall, like I don't know if that's really
It's tough.
Yeah, I don't know,
It's tough.
but you found like the
I
holy
did.
grail, I
I
feel
did.
like, on Reddit. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it suits your book really well. So now that we're back on the subject of your book and not my wedding a year from now,
No, I want to hear
then
all about it. That sounds
oh my
lovely.
God. Yeah, I never
So
talk about like I never
congratulations.
talk about thank you. I never talk I'm like I flash this at everyone now. I'm like, here's
Yeah.
like I'm just like there's no rock or anything, but I'm just like, oh, I'm
Mine
engaged.
has a
I'm
rock,
engaged.
but like,
So well. So but anyway, with your book, so like the cover suits it perfectly. I feel like I don't even necessarily need to read the product description either on the back of the cover or on Amazon to kind of get an idea of maybe where this might be going, like in terms of at least tone. So tell me a little about your book. So it's called The Black Hand. You put it
Black
out
Hand.
December of last year, right?
I did. I did.
And when I was looking at everything about it, I thought I like that you have a tag, like a solid tagline like that, where you're saying not all
Thank you.
heroes are saints and not all villains are monsters. Because I feel like
Yes.
having a good little hook like that is so helpful for drawing someone in.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, like very often I feel like the blurb or whatever that is going to describe the book is kind of just like it maybe doesn't have an element like that, and that kind of can get glossed
Right.
over by people, and they might just kind of
For
ignore
sure.
it or just be like, ah, it's not that interesting. So like that's a really good thing to have, and you put it like very boldly at the
I
beginning.
tried to.
So
Yeah.
yeah, no, like it's really good. So so the tagline is not all heroes are saints, not all villains are monsters. So without any spoilers, you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I'll tell you this because I've said this quite a bit. Um, it's a trilogy, but it is not a hero story. It is a villain story.
Okay.
And I personally am very obsessed with like the idea of all the gray space in between black and white of what we think is right and wrong, and this
Mhm.
idea that like you can become the villain without even realizing that it's happened. And so it happens very slowly over the books, and that's not something that even is in the Black Hand in the first one. It's very much of the main character kind of figuring out parts of herself. Um, but yeah, that's a little bit of this idea that like perception of who we are and history being written by the victors and this idea that like maybe the story you know isn't the story you thought it was, and the hero that you worship isn't really the hero that you want them to be, and the same thing for villains. So it's a good it's a good hook, like you said, to try and draw people in, but yeah,
That's
it's
cool. And here's the thing. Like I feel like and this is I'm saying this this may not be like accurate. But this is as saying this as someone who's not a fantasy reader so much. Like my kind of perception of the fantasy genre is that it tends to be very like it's very like good versus evil. There's
yeah.
usually like the chosen one type
Yes.
figure who almost takes on like a semi-messianic role
Oh,
and is like
absolutely. Yeah.
it's very good versus evil, which is like that's standard
I
for
mean,
like for many
I
genres. It's
think
not just
I think
that
it's
one,
boring, but like, all
but
right.
yeah, like I like that you're subverting that because like
Yeah.
it usually isn't it usually is very black and white with
Mm-hmm.
like this is righteousness and then this is evil and
Mm-hmm.
this I like that you kind of muddied that a little bit and kind of explored the like the morally gray areas that
Yeah.
like life is not as simple sometimes as just
Right.
here's the good guy and here's the bad guy because
Yeah.
I think I said this I've said this not online but I've said to like talking to people. So I moved to Vegas from DC. So in DC, everyone is political, and that's all people talk about like all the time. So like I had to
Yeah.
get into discussions like that all the time, and we would talk about like the Middle East or things like that. And I would say like, well, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And I feel like it reminds me of
Oh
that,
yeah.
like what you're talking about,
Oh
because
yeah.
it really depends on kind of like whose perspective you're looking at when you start talking
For
about
sure.
heroes and villains. So that's cool that you didn't really go the route of just like here's the good guy or girl and then
Yep.
here's like their arch nemesis villain who is like hell bent on whatever. Like
Right.
That's cool. I like that. So,
Yeah.
I want to ask you a couple of things that I had thought about in like previous interviews I did and never actually ended up asking. So my my exposure to fantasy is like fantasy books at least is largely just like the Game of Thrones stuff and then the Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings. Um,
Yeah.
both of which have like a pretty good number of point of views. Like there's a lot of characters in each of them. So
Yeah.
um I don't want to like generalize and say maybe that is like a hallmark of fantasy, but from what I have seen, there tends to be a lot of characters. I usually write a lot of characters too, but I'm not writing in fantasy. But like for your book, is this kind of from the perspective of like a very limited number of people? Or do you have a very large cast of characters? And if there are, like, are you showing it from people's point of view? Is it like,
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I just I don't really know. Like I just end up assuming that it's always like that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I've definitely run into all everything and everything in between. Like uh books where there's so many characters I've lost track. I've lost track and I can't keep track of anything. In the Black Hand, it specifically just follows the main character, Eric Sable, and kind of as if we're looking over her shoulder, keeping an eye on things, getting a little bit of like what's in her head. I think in general I like a good cast. Like I want to have good people in the story that like make the story feel very rounded out. But
Mhm.
having too many points of view for me can be really I can lose track of where we are. I think it's fun to have
Yeah.
like a couple and there's definitely a, there's a lot of people to keep track of uh
Mhm.
in the Black Hand, at least at the beginning. And I think what makes the mark of a good author is being able to push the characters that matter to the front so that
Mhm.
when you're looking over all of them you're thinking like okay so there's 20 people here right now like who matters like okay we have our main character we have her two best friends and we have the two guards that keep an eye on them like those are the characters that matter here and so their names stick out we remember them we remember features of them as an example.
Mhm. Yeah.
But like that's very much how I write. And I think in general though, with fantasy, there's a good mix of everything and everything in between, you know?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
please, everyone who's watching, I'm not trying to like stereotype like fantasy authors or fantasy books or anything. Like this
uh,
is honestly like I am like somewhat ignorant of these things. So I'm trying to
there's no
learn
like
here.
cookie cutout for any of the genres. Like if I've
Yeah.
learned anything about authors and books and the stories that we craft, like everyone is going to do it their own way and they
Mhm.
should like
Yes.
don't stick to the mold, you know,
Hmm.
like break the machine.
Yeah, like it's just you don't want to write like a template story that everyone else is
No.
doing, and it's just especially like as an indie author where you already have kind of I feel like it's in some ways it's like a little harder to try to convince people that you have credibility as a writer. Like,
Oh yeah.
like you don't want to then just kind of fall into the same patterns that everyone else is doing. Like you want to be set apart in some way. And I'm not saying to force it, but
Yeah.
if you find kind of like your thing, like your thing that works for you for whatever
Yeah.
genre you're writing in, like that matters a lot, I think. And like you can never
For sure.
you'll find it.
Yeah.
People will find it. Um, so yeah, for your book then, I'm gonna ask this. So this is another thing that I like. I feel like I'm stereotyping
No,
fantasy,
no, no. Hit
but
me.
okay. So magic. I feel like that magic's like a big thing. So is
Yeah.
there magic in yours or
There is. Oh yeah.
Okay, good. I
Yeah.
love that. Like I just feel like that makes me want to read fantasy more because that's always fun. And I just feel like it's I just wish that kind of stuff, and I feel like this is everyone who reads it, like, kind of wishes that was real. Like, so,
Yeah. I mean,
like we could talk about magic in terms of like people's, maybe having like neo-pagan beliefs or something, like in magic in that regard. But it's certainly
uh-huh.
not like the dramatic kind of magic that you see
Right.
in like a fantasy novel. So, I would love to talk a little bit about like the system of magic that you use, just because I had put out a video once where I was saying like I was like, oh, here are different like magical systems you can use for fantasy, but I was really just listing out ones that I know based on kind of like real life belief systems. So they
Mhm.
weren't necessarily like this is something that is typically used in fantasy. It was more like this is like a way to like springboard stuff. Like this is kind of a
Yeah.
system that people do adhere to. So so tell me a little bit about that, because I always find that really that like that's interesting to me, and like I got really into that.
Yeah. Well actually I watched your magic video and I was like I totally watched it not like 45 minutes ago.
Okay, yeah.
On like the 2 times speed because I was clicking through having a look and then I was like, oh my gosh. And then I wanted to listen to it while I was like curling my hair, but I was like, I don't have the time. So
Yeah.
I was listening to it really fast. I mean you hit all the big ones.
Mhm.
Yeah, no. So for the Black Hand, I I love magic. I wanted something that was uh fairly graspable in terms of a magic system that people could bite their teeth into. Because
Mhm.
sometimes you get into a book and they're trying to explain the magic and you're like, am I stupid? Like, do I
Does it
just
get like
not
really technical sometimes? Like, is that how people sometimes execute it?
people well, understand because when you're world building, your thought is like you're trying to build something that's super immersive and you want your magic to feel unique and immersive and connect to the world, and people can get really like too down the rabbit hole and it's
Hmm.
like come on back buddy, come on
Yeah,
back, like
it really
you've
did.
lost us all. So my the magic system in the Black Hand is actually a combination of a couple things. So it's a combination of D&D style magic. So I'm a
Okay,
huge Dungeons and Dragons nerd. I play all the time. Uh
awesome.
and so it's a combination of kind of like you need like words of power, ingredients, um an affinity for magic in general, like not everybody can do it. So it's kind of those
Hmm.
elements, a lot of studying and crafting magic,
Okay,
combined with some like witchcraft Wicca elements. So
okay.
a lot of moon phases are important. So the understanding, like, okay, well, if you were to cast under the wrong moon phase, like it might not go the way you want it to
Yeah.
go.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a combination of those two things, but very more heavily on the D&D magic. So my
Okay.
character, another little tidbit about the plot. Eric's gets pulled into a competition to become the king's magic sorcerer, like who's gonna be the right hand of the king. And
Hmm.
she's like very well aware that other people have magic and that's cool. And she's like, so they grabbed me and I don't have magic, so I'm gonna have to fake it till I make it so I don't die.
Hmm.
And that just means a lot of studying, carrying around pouches of vials and crushed flaxseed and a bunch of
Hmm.
other random things. But
Okay.
part of that is I also do cosplay and I sew and make costumes and stuff. And so for me,
Oh, that's so cool. I
I'm
love
also
that.
always thinking about things very visually. So the idea of her having a pouch that's clinking as she walks, because all the little jars are like there, and the idea of a work table that's scattered with jars and ingredients and all these like
Hmm.
little potions and things that like the stuff we loved from Harry Potter, like all
Yes.
of the fun parts of magic,
Hmm.
and combine that with like a lot of studying and a lot of like staring at the moon and being like, why isn't this working? Like,
Hmm.
so it's a
Yes.
combination of a lot of that,
Hmm.
but yeah.
No, that's cool. I when you were describing all the vials and stuff, I was picturing so Sleepy Hollow is like one of my favorite movies, the Johnny Depp one.
Yeah, yeah.
And like they go and find like the witch out in the western woods, and like they go into
Yes.
this little cave hut that she has, and it's just like all of these random like kind of creepy ingredients
Oh
for all
yeah.
the things she does. So I love that imagery a lot.
Yeah,
And I feel
that's
like
definitely
a
it.
lot of people are just find that
I
like
was
really appealing, and it's just
I don't know if
fun.
you can tell, but behind me I have this like curio shelf, this one right here.
Oh, that's awesome. I was kind of like
All
peeking
these little
behind
potion
you.
bottles.
I see like the ram
Yeah.
skull and all of that. Like, oh, that's badass. I love that.
Thank you.
So no, that's really cool. So like so they have, is this the kind of you were saying it's like D&D magic. So
Yeah, a little
I
bit.
I very briefly was into D&D. It was like my senior year of high school, and I had a bunch of friends who were into it. And I started to do it, and I thought it was really fun, but like it just never worked out because like no one could ever agree to like get together at a certain
Schedule.
time.
It's
And
always the schedule.
it was like pre-FaceTime and stuff. Like I had like a
Yeah.
Nokia flip phone. Like it was yeah, it was not a time where you could really do things at a
No.
distance.
Yeah.
So I never really like continued with it, but I did think it was really fun. And I like especially just like the imaginative aspect of it, where it like so much of it really it does have to like come out of your own head.
For sure.
And like I had the like those hardcover like guides where it would have all of
The
the
manual.
stuff
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought they were so cool and like the artwork and everything. But
Oh
you know,
yeah.
with like D&D magic, it would be like, okay, whoever casts such and such a spell. So like in your book, is there like an elemental kind of theme to the, because you're talking about like moon phases and stuff, and I'm thinking about what I know about like Wicca and things like that,
Yeah.
where it does have like the four classical elements, and then sometimes you'll incorporate like spirit into it.
Yes.
And so like,
Yeah.
do things kind of fall along like elemental lines, and like, do they need to actually utter like an incantation for it to be activated, or is this sort of like a like almost like a superpower where you know you raise your hand up and suddenly you're shooting like fireballs out of your hands? Like,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it
mhm,
is a lot of well, in even in D&D, there's certain spells that you don't necessarily need ingredients for. You don't have to say words for, or you don't need the concentration, so you can kind of just like make it happen. Those are usually like lower level spells. Um,
mhm,
and so the same kind of idea translates over into the Black Hand. So there are some spells that are like really easy to do, like if you're undoing a lock, or if you're just, you know, having a window fly open all of a sudden, or like little whispers from around the corner, like things
mhm.
like that are a lot easier. And then as you get into some harder spells, like having a big shield or having something just explode into flame, it's a lot of like hand motions. So one of them is you have to like draw on your hand and then turn and then slide down your finger, and you have to say a word or a phrase while you do it. And a lot of so I fun fact about Hannah, I grew up in Europe. I grew up in Bosnia,
Oh, okay.
and spent most of my childhood there, and only moved back to the States when I came back for college. And so
Hmm.
a lot of the language that's used for magic is Bosnian, which if if you speak Croatian or Serbian or Bosnian,
Hmm.
Montenegrin, like all that Slavic language, it's all very similar to that. So
Yeah.
the words of power, I'll call them, are very like they come from that Slavic language, and then the hand motions, and it's just kind of like all these little things that have to fall into place for a spell to work. And then you
Hmm.
have different elements that can help you channel a spell better or not. But one thing I know, you can't just throw that at a reader, because
Hmm.
we can't handle it's too much of like trying to drink from
Yeah.
a fire hose. Can't do it. And so by having the magic system be something that Eric's is learning to try to be able to survive
Mhm.
in this competition. Um, we're spoon feeding it to the main character, to Eric's, because she's learning it bit by bit. But in that same way, we're spoon feeding it to the reader, so that
Mhm.
we don't just hit them with like, oh yeah, so the moon's right, and you have this ingredient, and you have to have this, and your fingers have to make this motion. Like
Yeah.
it's too much all at once. And so when you're writing a kind of magic system, like, you have to be smart about how your reader is going to take it, because they're not going to instantly understand what you mean. Because I
Hmm.
know my readers aren't going to know what D&D is. Like they won't
Hmm.
necessarily know, or elements from Wicca, like they might not necessarily understand. And so I want to make sure that when I put in the story and I give it to the reader, they're taking it in a way that it makes sense. And so it's like, okay, well, we've mastered the first part. Great, good job. Now we've mastered this second part. And like by the time you get to the end of the book, there's magic that is sliding into place, and we know it and we get it because we've gone all along. And I think I kind of cheated in a little bit by having it be like her learning magic too. If I had just thrown everybody in the deep end and been like, magic works, good luck figuring that out, like
Mhm.
that could have been
I don't know. I think it's a clever way to like try to kind of ease people into it by just having them basically learning along with the character
like
who is
student
learning
teacher
it.
trope
So,
of like learning things. And
mhm.
yeah, it
No,
worked. I mean, it works.
no, it
So
works. Like that's totally fine. So, would you say that like, so I feel like you could people could either write magic as like it is sort of a world enhancing thing, or it could be like basically integral to the plot. Like the book
Yeah,
like basically can't exist, like the story can't exist without it, or it could just be something that kind of like adds some flair
right.
to the story. So what, like, where does yours fall? Like, would you say that magic plays like an extremely central role, or is it something that kind of just enhances the world that you've created?
It's definitely integral. So part of it is Eric's playing the game as she needs to of this kind of power struggle, and part of that is magic, and that like, well, if you are the black hand or the king's magician, or if you have magic at all, you're already a league above everybody else, and kind of
Mhm.
this thought of like, oh well, you're better than everybody already. And
So
Eric's,
it's like
we
a
start out.
sort of like elitism element
Yes,
to
it
that.
is. It
Okay.
really is. And
Mhm.
I mean, there was stuff that I wrote into the plot to kind of show that, like, for example, this is a little dark, but one of the problems that they've had in history of people with magic is that parents would sell their kids off because they knew their kid had an affinity to magic, and a noble family would buy the child in order to have that kind of magic in their blood and then like breed that into their line, which is,
Mhm.
it's gross. That's not
Yeah.
ideal, but
No, but that's it may be dark, but that's actually a really cool
right.
concept. Not cool, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
a
Well,
very like intriguing kind of scenario to even think about. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Unfortunately, if you have like a power struggle like that within your society, you're gonna have people who are going to break the system, who are going to find
Mhm.
loopholes and find ways around things because they want the power. So the magic in the Black Hand or the Black Kingdom as a trilogy
Mhm.
is very much tied to magic and the misuse of magic and the power struggle for who gets to control the magic and why.
Mhm.
It gets very exciting.
That's cool. I like, well, so I know when we were emailing, you mentioned like talking about world building. So that's actually, I want to like go into that because of what you were just saying. So you were talking about sort of like the societal structure and the sort of little like the dynamics that go on there between people who have access or ability to use magic and then people who don't, and how there's sort of like almost like a hierarchy there, like maybe not like
Yeah.
a formal, I'm not sure if it is like really like an institutionalized hierarchy or anything, but just like you got people who think they're better than the people below them. So
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
so you obviously have like gone into not just like the characters, showing what they go through, but like you are kind of depicting a society and sort of the
Mm-hmm.
situation of the society in a way. So how like bit like grand scale did you get, like when you came to this, like did you, is it like kind of focused on, okay, this character exists in a society where this is sort of the structure of everything and this is the situation that people are in socially, or did you go even bigger and you were kind of talking about, like, I don't know, are there multiple societies, is it only depicting just that one, like tell me a little bit about that. Like I
Yeah.
just, I love that stuff because I go like kind of all out when it comes to
Yes.
that. And
Yeah.
I always like having like a lot of cultures. It's
Me too.
fun with,
Yeah.
it's fun with sci-fi, and I'm sure just the same with fantasy, to be able to make up ones that are just completely fictional. And I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like I tend to write in that genre because I like that I don't have to research anything. Like I could just be like, this is, well, I made it up. It doesn't
No,
matter
I
if it makes
totally get it.
sense,
I totally get it.
like I just, I love that part of it because I could just have fun and just like do whatever I want. And I can kind of create societies that are either like, this is what I think is ideal, even though in the real world that doesn't exist. Or like I could be like, this is like a really messed up one, and then kind of play on that.
Yeah.
And so like with yours, are there kind of, um, are there different cultures that you're showing, or like different societies that may have like different structures and kind of different dynamics?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the greatest thing you can do as a writer is to put your own experiences into your work. And even though I'm writing fantasy, because I grew up as a TCK, a third culture kid, and kind of existed in a dual culture, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
growing up as like an American kid growing up in a very poor European country, that like for me, I saw a lot of the differences in like if I crossed the border from Bosnia into Croatia, or you know, if we traveled up into like Hungary or in France, like you would see a dramatic shift, even though the countries weren't that far away, and the only thing separating them was like a border, and that was it.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I think for me, when I was working on the Black Hand and building up the world, I knew I wanted to have the world be a mix of really beautiful parts of cultures all kind of smashed in and like built into something new. So the the country is actually broken up into four quadrants. Well, technically five,
Hmm.
and they're all the elements. So you have in the north you have Tamain. Tamain is earth. It's very people are sturdy. Think very like Viking,
Okay.
Icelandic, Nordic. And then you have in the north, south, east, west. I forgot what the cardinal directions were for a second there. In the east, you have Zarak, and Zarak is more of desert. It's very like you have a lot more nomadic cultures, very much inspired by the Middle East,
Hmm.
by Egypt. You still have a lot of like mountains and clay, a lot of underground caverns, and then as you shift further down to the south, you have Eldur. Eldur is very much inspired by kind of like vineyards of Italy and Provence in France, and you kind of have this like there's a lot of greenery, but as you move south, you have all these cliffs along the edge of where the sea is kind of inspired by the cliffs in Ireland, and
Hmm.
then as you move over, you have in the west you have Nero, and Nero is the richest section of all of them, and so they're very they're water. Also, I'm sorry, I don't think I said earth, air, fire, and water. And they're very like Grecian inspired, very Mediterranean. And then the center you have Mergur, which is the capital, and it's kind of like a conglomeration of all of those, and that's spirit. And this idea that like they all have very different things that are important to them in their culture, their clothing, the way that they see the world, even their corporal punishment is all very different because of the gods and goddesses that reign over the country and the elements that tie into the gods and goddesses. And it's when I wrote it all, I wanted it to be very very different. And as you
Hmm.
moved into each of the different sections of the country, you could feel the change happen in the way that people treated each other, in the way that they dressed, having poorer versus richer communities of like how do you treat the orphans and the widows in this section? Like how do you treat like people who have nothing, and how do you treat
Hmm.
people who have everything?
Yeah.
And I
Like
wanted that to
their
be
values and their
absolutely.
standards change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so I that was all very important to me. But I knew once again, I don't want to just throw all of that at my readers all at once. So in the Black Hand, it mostly takes place in the capital in Mergur. We have a small dip where we go over to Nero and pop back. We have a small dip where we hop into Zarak and come back. But that way I'm kind of like giving the readers little tidbits to show them
Hmm.
like look how different these sections of the countries are. And yet we have one king who's ruling over all these very different people. How do they handle that? And how is Eric's as the main character, like, how does she interact with the world? How does she see people? And she starts off as a thief. She starts off as the lowest of the low, stealing, very Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. And this idea of that she slips between the cracks of status to kind of, you know, even out the scale as best she can. But putting all of that together was something I worked on for a really long time in order to
Hmm.
give the story a lot of like richness and like full body, like
Yeah.
a good wine.
Yes.
But yeah, yeah.
Let me ask you. So I have seen people on, so I lurk a lot on like the writing subreddit. I don't really interact
Damn.
with people very much. So
Yeah.
like honestly, these interviews is like the first time I really started interacting with people, because while I would say that I'm like a pretty extroverted person, I spend literally my entire day schmoozing patients. So I like it's exhausting for me like to have to like
Sure.
try to
Oh my
then
God.
interact with people that like I don't know, and it's like online. So I just kind of I tend to read what other people are putting up and the kinds of questions that they'll ask. And
Yeah.
I do see people asking questions about like where do like how do you come up with like a kind of outlandish fantasy name or like a sci-fi name or for either a character or a place or civilization or whatever.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that the magic you use like Bosnian inspired
Hmm.
words. So like the names of the little kingdoms that you just gave or the quadrants
Yeah.
that you just gave, like are those also Bosnian, or did you come up with those on your own, or are they based on something else?
some of them.
I'm a language nerd and I don't know anything about like Bosnian. I know like generally Slavic
Oh,
stuff, but like
well,
that's yeah.
I mean, it sounds very Russian if you were to hear it, like because we've all
Mhm.
heard Russian in like
Yeah.
some Bond movie. Like there's a
Hmm.
Russian and
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
speaking about, and you're like,
You will disappear like small dog in Siberia, like that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, Bosnian sounds very similar to that, although it
Okay.
has, I think, a little bit less of a harshness. No,
Hmm.
I so some of the names are 100% pulled from my brain. Like I just
Hmm.
was like, that sounds pretty. Let's
Yeah,
do that, and
that
I
one
type out.
sounds good.
So I'm a very visual person. If I can see it and it looks right, I'll be like, solid. We're gonna go with that. And if
I'm the
it
exact
sounds,
same way.
yeah,
Exact
yeah.
same
And
way. Hmm.
do you? Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna totally derail this just for like a quick
No,
second.
go
We can
right
come back.
ahead. Go right ahead. Yeah.
I cannot spell to save my life, but I can look at a word. It doesn't even have to have like the red squiggly line under it. I can look at a
Mhm.
word and be like, it's wrong.
It's
And I
wrong.
don't know why,
You
but
just know
it's wrong.
instinctively that it's wrong. It's just like this like visceral reaction to it. You
Yeah.
just
Oh
know.
yeah.
So
Do you have that? Is that do other people have that problem, or is that just a me
my eyes,
thing?
I swear to God, are like drawn to spelling mistakes if I'm like this happens to me every single time I go to a restaurant. Like I will like and you walk in and they'll have like a chalkboard that says like here's like today's specials and like I don't even read the whole thing. Like I just like somehow my eyes just drift to the like glaring
Yeah.
error. And I'm just like I don't know. Like I was my first job out of college, I was like proofreading.
Oh
So
bless.
I except it was like proofreading like credit card fine print for American Express. Like it sucked. But it like I just feel like I having to like read giant blocks of tiny text and then like
Yeah.
spot little errors. Like I just ended up being I don't know. I just do it like instinctively at this point. But I feel that way about like when I'm making up a name for something. So because I'm crazy, I always I do this for my sci-fi a lot. I will make up constructed languages for it. It is like peak dorkiness.
No,
Like
it's
yeah.
phenomenal. Don't.
So
It's
no,
yeah.
like when I tell you that I have like 13 fully functional languages that I made up for this stuff that like I didn't even use in the book. Like that's how like you talk about like wasting time with like excessive world building, like that is my
Yeah.
thing, like that is my game. So like I always do that. So I have all these languages that like I barely use, but like it is helpful for when you're trying to come up with naming, when you're trying to name things. But
Yeah.
ultimately, you are just making up these words, and I'm just like sort
Yeah.
of like, oh well, that sounds cool, or like that phonetically kind of matches
Good enough.
what
Good
I
enough.
was thinking. So, but the spelling has to look nice. Like it has to
It
be
does.
visually nice because it's not like any of the readers are going to like, it's just like a made up word to them. So like
Right.
it has to be appealing in some way, either be like alluring or pretty or cool looking or just I, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
it's just
Oh
what
yeah.
we do as like sci-fi and fantasy authors. Like you just make stuff
Oh
up.
for
So,
sure.
but it seems like people like the people who are asking questions on Reddit, like maybe they are not really sure. And it's not just Reddit; it's anywhere. But like they, they're just not sure where to come up with a name. So like there was when I had first started. Actually, the first thing I never finished it. The first like real story I ever started writing. I think I was in like eighth grade and or seventh grade, and
Yes.
I was really into at the time I was really into like neo druidism. It was like my thing back then. So I'm not anymore, but back then I was really into that. And so everything was sort of themed around that. So it had like a
Yeah.
lot of Celtic influences. I was really into
Yes.
that. And so I had been writing this story and I couldn't really come up with any names. And that was when I first started dabbling in like conlanging, and I made up like a really, really simple one. And but before I had done that, I was trying to think of ways to come up with character names. So I had gone on, it's like a baby name website or something, like behind the
Yes.
name or something.
Yes.
Yeah, I had used that and I'm like, what's a name that means brave? And then I'm like looking it
Yeah.
up. And honestly,
Yeah.
it was like a good way if you like really couldn't come up with anything, like at
Yeah.
least it was something. So like that's an option, I guess, for people. But I
Oh
love just
yeah.
making up. like
Yeah.
whatever
I
words.
swear to God,
So
half of the names in my book are either totally made up bullshit that I like pulled out of my head,
mhm.
or they like mean something. So like in Bosnian or something. Like
Yeah.
Zarak is is comes from Zrak, which is breath or
Mhm.
air, and it's
Okay.
the
Makes
air.
sense. Yeah.
But I also use the baby name websites because they're so like I'm like, okay, I want this character who's secretly evil
Mhm.
to have an evil name, but I don't want my readers to know it. Like I'm gonna be tricksy. I'm gonna
Yeah.
trick them,
Sneaky.
and that's what I do. It's like you know you find. Oh, I also do. I'll look up languages. So Google Translate. I'll look up like I'll do like a reverse search for an English word and then look at like since like Eldor is very inspired by like Italy and France, I'll look up words that
Mhm.
like French and Italian that kind of sound similar, and then I might change like a vowel around or something like that. But
Mhm.
it's you know it's a lot of just like here's a bunch of spaghetti and like throw it on the wall. What sticks? Like cool, that works.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna go with. Like sounds good.
I love that. So let me ask you now. Your book, it's the Black Hand is the title. What was the name of the series that you're because you're writing a trilogy, right? So,
Yes.
okay,
So the first book is The Black Hand. The trilogy is called The Black Kingdom. The second book, which I'm actually working on right now, is called The Black Crown, and then the
okay,
third one will be The Black Kingdom.
like that a lot. So
Yeah.
you were planning. I know I don't want to make you commit to any date or anything, but I know that you're prepping the second one for maybe like the beginning of 2025, hopefully.
Yes. The goal, that's the goal. My ADHD is like crazy right now. So I'm having some hard times hitting my deadline, which my goal is to try and get things written, wrapped up by the end of August, and then spend the rest of the year doing some core edits and working with my cover artist,
Mhm.
working on getting some feedback from beta readers, and then the goal, ideally,
Yeah.
would be to have the Black Crown be available January 2025. That is the goal I am
Mhm.
doing my darndest to meet.
Do you
But
plan to do you do pre-orders? Like are you into that?
I
Or
did do a pre-order for the Black Hand. I think I would definitely do it again.
Mhm.
It was really great to kind of get an idea of how many people might be interested in the book, and
Mhm.
then doing a pre-order also helps boost your first week of sales. So I think I probably will be doing that again. Most likely I will put the pre-order up sometime in the fall if my timeline
Okay.
functions the way it should.
Mhm. Yeah. It's
But
like no
yeah,
pro I'm always like that. I'm like no promises because I just like life gets in the way sometimes. It's just not always that easy.
oh,
And
for
like
sure.
I had talked to another author about kind of like the process of getting a book like if you're going to be picking out like a release date, kind of like how you can really quantify like how far along you are.
Right.
And we both ended up kind of saying that like word count goals are not always the best way to measure that necessarily. So like I don't
Starting
know.
point
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
like yeah, like it can be that you were thinking, okay, well, I want to hit this goal, but then it turns out that you didn't need to write that many to actually get the point across, or you needed to write a hell of a lot more than that to actually get the point
Right.
across. So it ends up being like maybe not like a super hard like this is the mark and this is what it's going to be, but like sort of
Yeah.
like a we're hoping to be somewhere around this. So like are you I'm a planner. I'm like a neurotic planner when it comes to stuff. Like I outline the crap out of stuff. And I know that not everyone does
Yeah.
that. Like I'm just really OCD, like to the point where even my background files or stuff, I think I put a video up once where it was me showing kind of like the background Word document that I have with like all my world building notes and just like scrolling through it and having like a screen share where I'm showing like, oh yeah, like this is the
Yeah.
section I do for this or that.
Yeah.
And like I'm so crazy that I'm like using like here's heading one and then like subheading and like it has to be pretty and because
Yeah.
I get
Oh yeah.
distracted if it's not pretty and I'm just like I'm crazy when it comes to that stuff. So like for
Oh
you,
yeah.
are you more of a planner? Are you like kind of a you write like see where it takes you, like
Yeah.
having a general idea in your head and just kind of seeing how it plays out, or you like fall somewhere between that?
I definitely think I fall somewhere in between. I will say though, my current outline is approaching 30 pages because
Sounds
it
like
just
me.
continues,
Yep, I know
and
what
it has
that's like.
all
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
headers and the subheaders and everything's color coded. Because I have to. But also at the very bottom, there is a very scavenged, incomplete sentences mess of bullet points that I just like. Sometimes I'll be like, and I'll just like type it in. So,
I do
so
the exact same thing. The exact no, like seriously, like you'll see at the end of it, like it's just like all of these
yeah.
random either like bullet points or like
Oh yeah.
nonsensical kind of like arrangement of random words where then I have to later be like, what was I talking about when I wrote that?
I I I have a video on my TikTok that's me reading off some of the bullet point things and to try to like show people like this is what this looks like. And there's one that just it's I don't even remember, but there were just some things where I was like, what? What does that mean?
What is
Like
that?
no clue. I try to stick to my outline as much as I can, but what ends up
Mhm.
happening is I'm like, this needs to happen here. And then as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, but I could do this. Well, that would be a great time for this conversation to happen. And then before I know it, it's like 8 chapters later, and I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, now to get to the next point
Yeah.
on my outline.
Well, like I always figure, something like that, like either an outline or like even just like a world building, like file with all your notes and
Yeah.
everything, like should be kind of like a organic sort of thing that can evolve and it can change.
Oh,
Like
for
it doesn't
sure.
have to be like a set list of like rules for yourself or anything.
Yeah.
Like you can adapt it. So well, I hope that you meet your goal. I trust that you'll
Thank
be
you.
able to. So
I hope
so
so.
yeah, I'm excited. Like I really do want to read The Black Hand. Like honestly, the cover alone makes me want to read it. So proof that people judge a book by its cover because it is so
True.
much harder to sell if the
It's
cover's not
true.
pretty, and that is a damn pretty cover. So
Thank you.
I really want to read that. So it like if I ever if
I'll send
I
you a
get my
copy.
life to I was gonna say if I get my
No,
life oh I will
I'll send you a copy.
oh, I love you. No, I'll buy it. Like I don't wanna,
I'll send you a copy.
Okay.
It'll
I
be
would
an
appreciate
exchange
that.
between you send me a copy of your book, I'll send you a
Hell
copy
yeah.
of mine.
Okay. Yes, I'm gonna
Whichever one
send
you want me to
you.
read, and I'll read
So
it, and
my general
we'll
fiction
swap.
book, I always say this, is better than my sci-fi stuff. So I'm going to I like that book so much more personally. So I will
Okay.
send you that one.
Okay.
But I really do want to read it. So then once the second one's out and then once the third one's out, like I'm excited to see how that goes for you and just to see the story that you're telling.
Me too.
So
I'm
yes,
also very
so
excited. Who knows?
it's so
Eric's might
fun like
make
putting
a
something
left
out.
turn, so
Mhm.
I don't know. She's steering this bus. I don't know
She's
where we're
steering
going.
it. Yeah, she's running the show. So, well, thank you so much, Hannah, for being on here. Everyone who is watching this, I'm gonna put links to Hannah's book. I'm also gonna put a link to her website and her social media. Side note, you have a very pretty website too, actually.
Oh, thank you.
It's very nice looking. So, I encourage everyone to check that out. And I really hope to have Hannah on here again if she was willing to put up with
Oh,
me
I would
a
love.
second time.
I would
And
love that.
okay, good. So we'll definitely talk more about our love of making up random words
Right.
and random collections of letters and notes that we can't understand at the end of our Word documents. So
Absolute gibberish.
yeah,
Just a mess.
so, if any of you are interested in appearing on my channel, I would love to have you on here. I really want to interview just other indie authors. And I've gotten messages from people who also kind of fall outside of that. Like I actually had someone who writes the stories for video games and stuff. And I think is really, isn't that cool? Like, I feel like that'll be a really interesting one. So yeah,
I can't wait.
even if you're not like an indie author in the sense that we typically talk about it, like, please let me know. I would love to have you on here. And yeah, until next time, thank you so much everyone for watching and hope to see you again soon. God bless you all.